Hi, I'm Rohan Deshpande, and this is my Intimate Apparel video journal. One thing that I found interesting about this play was that Mrs. Van Buren, she said that she's really only happy around Esther, and she thinks of her as her only friend, but she doesn't even know what Esther's life is like. She doesn't even know what she goes through on a daily basis. So that kind of leads me to my next point. One value in this dramatic world is that colored people, they can't have the same things as white people can, obviously because this is a segregated time. And Mrs. Van Buren also, she said that she would invite Esther to an opera, but it would turn into a scandal for her because inviting the black woman to an opera. And also, Esther's dream is to build a beauty parlor for colored people, and it's so great that they are treated like white people. And it really emphasizes the distinction between what whites have in their privilege and African American life at the time. Another value is that women, they seek marriage in order to have a more stable life. So like Mrs. Dickinson's mother, as she was explaining, she married up in her life to give her a better position. And also Esther, she says that if she stays single with Mrs. Dickinson forever, then she's just gonna remain nothing for her life, and she's gonna be like dust. And so she thinks that finding a husband will add some meaning to her life. One thing that I didn't understand was what a chattel slave was, or shadow slave. And George mentioned this because he said when he was giving his life story, he said that he was a shadow slave. And this is just a normal slave, like one we would think from the South, like a plantation worker. Their entire family is slaves. The children that are born are slaves, and they're treated as property. And so George, I could see now that he had a rough past. He was treated like property before because he was a slave, and I could see now like he wanted to escape, and he wanted to come to the United States to have a better life, and like that's what he was drawn here for, from what he heard. And he also talks like he's a bit uneducated, which he is because he's a slave. So I can see why that is now. Intimate Apparel, I feel like it really emphasizes the struggles that African Americans go through and how that contributes to the African American experience because it shows how society is keeping them down. But even from these like low positions, they still work hard and they still remain proud. And this scene, like with Esther, she's restricted from her time. Like she had nothing, but she worked her way north, and now she makes an honest living. She's a good person. And I feel like this play, it kind of reinvents our understanding of the African American experience. As I said, we see how African Americans are oppressed by society. They're restricted by their positions. They have hard pasts. They have families that are freedmen now, but they still got to work. And so they still have dreams, and they worked hard towards them with pride. And also, I feel like stereotypes are a bit reinforced here, but it gives like a new side at the same time. Like we see the background and why these stereotypes exist and how the circumstances are harming these people, but they still live proud, and it's cool to see. Stereotypes of African Americans obviously still do exist today. We can see, especially with what's going on with Black Lives Matter, the George Floyd case right now. I feel like the media perpetuates these stereotypes inadvertently, usually. Like you see a crime story on the news and you see like the suspect is an African American male. You're like, oh, of course. So like that kind of strengthens that stereotype, even though it may not be true. Also, but diversity and inclusion, they help to overcome these stereotypes. So like we see people, we know people, and we see like, oh, they're not actually what the stereotype is. Like let's say you have like a Jewish friend who pays for your food, and when you go out to eat, and you're just like, oh, not all Jewish people are cheap like that. One question I had was, do you think that Mrs. Van Buren is in love with Esther, or do you think she just values her company because she's lonely? Another question is, do you think George was actually in love with Mame, or do you think he was using her just like he was using Esther? Something about that.